Who do you get when you combine being an artist, an educator, a writer, a designer, a curator, and the host of one of the top design podcasts in the world? Debbie Millman, that's who. My conversation with her is next on the Branders Magazine Talking with Branders podcast. And we're back with another episode of the Branders Magazine Talking with Branders podcast. I am your host, Stephen Bacanza, and today, gang, I am joined by the one and only Debbie Millman. She's an artist, she's an educator, a writer, a designer, a curator, and a host of a podcast that I've been listening to for years, the Design Matters podcast. Hi, Debbie. Welcome to the studio.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So for those people who have been living under a rock and have no idea who you are, 60-second elevator pitch of who you are, where you come from, and what you do.
Okay. Well, my name is Debbie Millman. I am a native New Yorker. I've lived in all the boroughs except the Bronx, but there's still time. I am somebody that's worked in branding for most of my professional career, about 30 years or so. For 20 plus years, I was the president of a branding consultancy called Sterling Brands, where I worked on some of the world's biggest brands and had a blast doing so. I founded the world's first graduate program in branding at the School of Visual Arts, where I've been chair of that since 2010. So I've been doing that now for 13 years. Started a podcast called Design Matters, as you mentioned, 18 years ago, which is kind of surreal. As you can well imagine from just this little intro, I tend to do things for a long time. I'm very committed, have a good work ethic, and so I tend to stick around. And I've also written 7 books, about half of them on branding. And I am the co-owner of Print Magazine, printmag.com, where along with my colleagues, we bought the brand out of bankruptcy and have been trying to resurrect it now for the last couple of years. So those are the things I do.
Well, that's amazing. And consistency is like, brand rule number 1. So you live it every day. One of the things that I found really interesting and eye-opening is that you were one of only 5 women to hold the position of president emeritus with AIGA. And that's incredible. Like over 100 years and such a small percentage have been women. How has that influenced you, and how has that been how has that propelled you to really try to break barriers down within the creative and advertising world?
That's a great question. Actually, I should say now, I believe there's 6. When I left, the next woman after me was Sue Matthews Hale, and then Ashley Axios. So I think there's 6 of us now, but still, it's also been many, many more years since I left. I was president of AIGA from 2009 to 2011. So that there were 2 additional in 11 years is not a great statistic.
Right.
But even more so, when I started in branding, there were I'm not going to say no. There were very few senior women executives, both on the client side as well as the agency side. There were a handful on the client side, most notably Pamela Parisi, who ran the brand design function at G.O.A.T. And the most senior woman at the time on the agency side was Margaret Youngblood at Landor. But the fact that I could tell you those 2, and this was in the 90s, this was in the early to mid 90s. So when I started, there were really, and Pamela DeCesar, shortly thereafter headed up the design function at Kraft. But the fact that there's this handful of people that were doing that back then really shows you how the world has changed, because now so many women are heading up the branding consultancies and the brand design function in corporations. So the world has dramatically changed in the last 30 years in terms of leadership and the role that women have in branding. Not quite as successfully in advertising. In advertising, there's still a big giant gap.
Yeah.
But branding, there's much more parity, which is exciting and thrilling, and I'm very, very pleased to see how that has changed.
Yeah, one of in a previous episode, I spoke with Laura Thomas from Peter Mayer Agency, and we had this whole conversation around DE&I within the agency walls. And a question I asked her, which I want to ask you too, is like, for myself and for other counterparts that want to champion DE&I and champion, evening the playing field for all races and all humans, how can we better support when sometimes we feel like we don't know how to support?
We have to hire people of color. We have to give them an opportunity. We can't just wait for them to show up. We have to actively look for people that are smart and capable and hire them and give them salaries and freedom to lead. That's what we have to do. There's no silver bullet. There's not going to be a situation where 10 qualified people of color come knocking on a company's door. We have to go out. We have to make the effort. We have to give them opportunity, and we have to give them the trust to lead.
Yeah. It's like, we can't be passive about it. It's an active sport, right? Yeah. Passivity doesn't work anymore. I've read it. I think I was scouring your Wikipedia page or something about you, and you talked about that early in your career, and I love this, that it was a series of experiments and rejections and failures.
Yes.
And I look back on my life, I'm like, shit, like I'm still experimenting and still getting rejected and still failing. But
so am I, Stephen. I am constantly being rejected from things. I think the trick is to just try not to give up. You can be sad and cry and wallow for a day or two when you're rejected from something that means something to you. But I think the onus is on everyone to continue to try if that's something that you want to do. It's only a failure if you accept the defeat.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like, my studio is right outside Philadelphia. Like, I'm really near the Ben Franklin Bridge, and I think it was Ben Franklin that said that success is moving from failure to failure without any loss of enthusiasm. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. And as creatives, right? Like, not everything we do is a home run. And I've been deeply influenced by your career and the path that you've done. I'm just doing all these things. I mean, when I said, those words in the beginning, artist, educator, writer, designer, curator, it's like you are embodying all of that. But then you read, I read an article and you talk about the rejections and the imposter syndrome. And it's like, no matter what, we all face that, right? That's the human experiment right there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of somewhat embarrassing to say this, but I've been rejected so many times that I just expect to be rejected. And in some ways it doesn't hurt as much, but sometimes I do get really demoralized. Like, why is it so hard? Why can't it be?
Yeah.
Why do I have to try so hard over and over for so many things? Because very few things have just been like handed to me as a gift. And the only things that I can say that were the opportunity to work with Steve Heller on creating the Masters in Branding program at the School of Visual Arts. And then Steve also recommended me for my first book deal. He's the person that recommended that a publisher reach out to me about a book that he had actually that he had rejected doing. He didn't want to do it, but he thought I'd be a good candidate to do it. So I always suggest to people, like, cozy up to Steve Heller, and maybe, you'll get lucky too, the way I was. But everything else has been just a street fight to get to where I am.
What do you attribute to your persistence and that mindset? Is it that New Yorker in you? Is it what's that drive? Where does that come from?
Well, I've been asked this question a lot because I think I've been so public with my rejections and my failures. So I've thought about it, and the best answer I could give you is that I think I have one notch more hope than shame.
Oh,
And
that's brilliant.
there's that sort of the way the universe was created, there's maybe one bit more matter than antimatter, and that's why we're all here. I think that I have one atom more of hope about my possibilities than I do shame about my past.
I mean, but that's just a positive way to live. I'd rather live that way than be the opposite, where I'm a little bit more shameful than I am hopeful. That's like, oh, I don't want to live that existence.
It depends on the day. It depends on the day. Not every day.
No, that's exactly true. That's exactly true. You just spoke about the master's program that you started, and I'm an adjunct at Drexel, and I teach branding there, and I've taught some other universities, and I've gone through branding programs. But what makes the SVA Masters of Branding different than like, let's just say Marty Neumeyer's Level C program?
Well, the fact that I run it.
Yeah, I love it.
But no, I'm teasing. The way that I structured the program, because I don't have a master's degree, was what would I have wanted to learn as I was coming up through the world of branding. And branding is not only a participatory sport that really requires a lot of different players on the team.
Yeah.
But it's also a multidisciplinary practice. And so when you're working in branding, you're not just working in branding, you're working in cultural anthropology, behavioral psychology, economics, business strategy, creativity. So you really need to have a fairly profound expertise in all of those disciplines for them all to organically come together to create the practice of branding. And so we have specific classes with very specific experts in those fields to teach that practice, that discipline. All of the faculty are working professionals. They're some of the top working professionals in the world. And we also give the students an opportunity to work on 2 or 3 real live client projects in the 10 and a half months of the program. That's another very big difference. It's an intensive. I always tell people, no matter how hard they're working, anytime between September and July, which is the months of the program, that at any point, even on day 1, next year at this time, you will be done. And so it is a very intense program, but it's also catered to working professionals. All of our classes start at 6:30. And so you can have a robust full-time job, but still be able to attend the program. It's also a hybrid program. So we can either have on-site students in the classroom or online students in a community of online students that are in a room all together and have ways that are specifically structured to working with them.
Wow. And after all these years, you said you started this in about 2010-ish, around there?
The first cohort of students graduated in 2011.
How's the program changed since then?
Well, it's an interesting question. Some of it is constantly changing.
Of course.
And we also still have about half of our founding faculty. So there's been a tremendous consistency and refinement of those classes that they teach, sort of like a fine wine. That's how I describe it. But we're always adding new classes. I think the biggest change is how much more we've stuffed into the experience. So whereas before we had classes Monday through Friday, now we have classes Monday through Friday. We have lots of Saturday classes, workshops, additional ways that we can bring what is, I believe, required for somebody to be able to be a brand consultant or a brand strategist now. So there's a lot of classes, a lot more activity.
You know, that term brand strategist is seeing its peak now, right? That term is everywhere. Everyone is a brand strategist now. Everyone is doing that. And has it become commoditized? Has it lost its essence on what the discipline really is?
Depends on the practitioner, just like anything else, in the same way that anybody that owns an iPhone can be a photographer. I think that it really depends on who you are, how you practice, what knowledge and magic and inspiration you bring to any assignment. I'd like to think that we equip our students to approach the work that they're doing in brand strategy with a lot of soul, with a lot of care, and with a deep intelligence and empathy. And
Yeah.
I think based on what we're seeing our students do, particularly the students that graduated 10 years ago or so, they're some of the leaders in the industry now, which is just not surprising, but just astonishing and extraordinary for me to be perceiving. You know, heads of agencies that came out of our program, heads of a particular brand in a corporation, that just leaves me sort of awestruck.
I'm sure that soothes your soul in a way, right? You talked about soul, like that's got to be like warming inside.
Absolutely. And there's just a tremendous pride to seeing the kind of work that our students are doing.
Yeah.
Milton Glaser was the head of the board of directors at the School of Visual Arts when I was brought on to take on this position. And I had to meet with him one-on-one in order for him to sign off on the program. And one of Milton's strongest beliefs were that designers should do no harm. And so he asked me to promise that the kind of branding we would teach the students that came through the SVA program would encourage students to do good in the world through branding and not add to the garbage and the junk that's out there. And I take that very seriously, not only because Milton wanted me to, but because I also believe that we have a choice every day about how we can use branding either to make more crap or to build new movements that inspire people to do better in the world. And that's really the path we try to take.
I love that. That is so profound. We have a responsibility, right? And we're with great responsibility, and we are helping to guide the future of culture and the future of society. So what's your opinion then on the intersection between branding and social issues? Like how does branding, quote unquote, help to guide that and propel that forward, or push it back, depending on how you look at it?
Well, at its foundation, at its core, branding is manufacturing meaning. And we can do that with a religious symbol to signify our beliefs. We could do that with a wedding band to signify our status. We can do that with the device that we hold on to when we're texting. All of these things are manufactured. They're not things that grow in trees or are growing out of the soil. We make these things. And in doing so, we imbue meaning in these things. When that meaning reaches a consensus among a large group of people, we accept it as reality. So we have a large group of people that believe in Catholicism. We have a large group of people that believe that Apple products are better than any others. We have people that believe that an Hermes handbag is valuable in relation to what it costs. These are all belief systems that humans create. And so we use those same systems, whether it's a religion or whether it's a brand tribe, or whether it's how we structure how we structure and organize our lives, whether it be the way we organize our families or our relationships. So the basic tenets are all the same. It's how we use them that creates a difference. And as much as I hate to say this, and as much as it scares me to say it, the tenets for creating a movement like the Nazis is very much the same. Now, the belief systems are different, and the way in which we behave is fundamentally different. but the way we get people to believe is the same. And that's why we have to be very, very, very careful with our work.
You know, it's one of those things, right? History predicts the future, right?
Absolutely.
And you touched on religion, which is historical, and they got billions of people to rally around a belief system. And you hit upon Nazism, same thing. So the future, as we look towards the future, what's grounding your optimism, but what's feeding your pessimism?
Well, one thing I just want to add is, if we think about the Bible is just a big book of brand guidelines. In terms of what excites me is that we're living in an age where once again, we see what I call bottom-up branding. Bottom-up branding is when regular people, create brands to signify their beliefs. Black Lives Matter was very much bottom-up branding. Me Too was bottom-up branding. Essentially movements created by people for people that have nothing to do with money. Now, that's very exciting. What terrifies me are things like the MAGA movement and how people really, truly believe what Donald Trump says.
Yeah.
About making America great again, because that's also a brand.
Mm-hmm.
And this, it's also, again, the same tenets. Human beings are extremely persuasive, extremely vulnerable to hive thinking. We're social creatures. We feel safer and more secure in groups. We feel safer and more secure in groups that all believe the same things. There's a reason we all go to a specific environment to do our praying. So what scares me is we have the potential to do good or do harm with the very same capabilities. And that's something that will likely either save us or doom us. Because ultimately, it's up to us.
Right.
And what scares me is that it's up to us. We are a very complicated species, and we have the power one way or the other.
We do have the power, and you touched upon so much. I am a practicing Stoic, and I very much follow meditations of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, and to some extent Seneca. Although I was on I interviewed another gentleman on this podcast where we talked about, was Seneca full of shit with his personal brand, and consensus was he was. His letters that he wrote were saying one thing, but he was holding Nero's court on the other side. So it's this idea of do your core values and your day-to-day actions align? And I think the best brands, they do, right? The Patagonians of the world, what they talk about and what they do are aligned. But I think so many brands are just looking to check a box and say, well, I need to check this box. That's dangerous.
Highly, highly dangerous and duplicitous. It's performative and it's opportunistic and it's really deceiving the public.
Yeah.
All brands need to take risks now in order to stand for what they believe in, but they're so afraid of backlash and they're so afraid of boycotts that they have to do an opinion poll before they'll stand for something with real rigor.
Yeah.
That's not standing for something. That's opinion polling.
That's so fascinating. So opinion polling, as we enter the age of AI, we enter the age of, being able to digitally manufacture stuff. What's your opinion on how AI is going to influence, as branders, as designers, how we operate and how we create in the future?
Stephen, I know just enough about AI to be dangerous.
I think we're all in that same boat.
Our caveat here is that no one should take what I'm saying because I don't know that it is. And I can't stand by what I'm going to say because it changes every day. And so by the time it's shares, I'll probably have different thoughts. I've spent a lot of time reading Marian Banshee's point of view on AI, and she's very pro AI. She feels that it's only something that can help us as designers and thinkers and creative people, because AI is not sentient. It doesn't have the power to make those creative jumps and connections that humans can, but they can fuel our work in a more robust way. So Poom Lubefiore from Design Army, she's doing incredible work with AI. So you have these two sort of very strong, very, very at the top of their game, as far as I'm concerned, creative people saying AI can only help fuel our output. And then you have people that are published in the New York Times that are saying, you know, AI is the reason civilization is doomed. So at this point, I'm just doing a lot of reading and a lot of trying to understand how to use it, even because I'm not a particularly technical person. So I have I have daily fights with my TV remote. So the idea of being able to do something really remarkable and groundbreaking on Midjourney is sort of not possible for Debbie Millman, at least not yet. And so I'm very curious to see where it goes. I am somebody that really believes very strongly in combinatorial creativity, and how one creative leap inspires another and inspires another. And those leaps are not something that AI can do yet. So right now, I'm not that worried about it. I'm really curious about it. The combinatorial leaps of creativity are what I'm most fascinated by in our culture. And I don't think that it's capable yet of being able to do something like that.
What a fascinating perspective and how you framed it. So in the lens of, are you talking about AI in the Masters of Branding program at all? Like, has that made it into there? And are you encouraging usage? Are you discouraging?
This is something that we're contending with right now. Mostly, we're concerned about students using AI to think for them, not to use AI to augment their work. And so the School of Visual Arts is actually, all of the chairs of all of the many graduate departments are working on developing guidelines for how to use AI. Because we found that it's very easy to use AI to answer questions. AI is best when you put in prompts. The more you're capable of prompting AI, the better results you're going to have. And that certainly is an exercise that we need to undertake to help people be able to do that in the best way possible. But it becomes a little bit too easy to rely on AI to answer questions. So we have to start coming up with better questions to ensure that they're not answerable by AI. So that's the work we need to do.
Oh, that's really, it's one of those things where I see it. You could see it on LinkedIn. You could see the people who are posting on LinkedIn where it's just a regurgitated, you tell by the language, and it comes off as inauthentic. It comes off as almost a slap in the face to some of us out there. You know, I fear that, like you said, that perhaps the next generation are going to be cheating using AI and you know, not fulfill their creative destiny. And you know, and that's something that, you know, that upsets me, because I think that we all have this creative destiny that we can achieve.
It's a tool, and I think, like any other tool, it could be used in a way that is generating new ideas, or it could be used as a way to avoid having to do work. Now, if you're doing something to avoid doing work, ultimately you're harming yourself, because you're not able to learn as much or experience as much. Now, that's all good and fine, but when you're up against a deadline or you're in finals week, that might not be as salient a reason not to do it. But
right.
I still think that it's up to us to determine what is acceptable and what isn't, and be able to defend that.
Yeah.
And we haven't.
No, we haven't. I mentioned in the beginning, as we sort of wrap up here, that if you haven't listened to the Design Matters podcast, you are living under a rock. And it's obviously a must listen. You've interviewed some of the most creative minds over the years. What stands out to you, and how have some of those conversations influenced you and your work?
It's a multifaceted answer. The first thing that I was thinking about was my recent interview with Rick Rubin. And Rick Rubin's book really forced me to confront some of my own barriers in why I felt like I was or wasn't doing something. And the book made me cry. It was hard to read, but it's an incredible book that really forces you to confront your own laziness and your own inabilities in a way that no other creative book I've read, except maybe Seth Godin's books. Seth Godin's books do that for me as well. He's written more of them. I feel that the best conversations lead me to understand why we as a species do the things we do. The best conversations inspire me to try harder. I'm also sometimes very comforted by the fact that some of the world's most creative people are still insecure and still worry about being able to do it the next day and be as good as they were yesterday. And I would say that the majority of people that I interview feel that way, especially if they've achieved greatness or won an Oscar or a Webby or a Clio or whatever it is, Cannes Lion. If I've already done it, can I still do it again? And that's something that I don't think people that are constantly wanting to achieve ever stop feeling.
I will say, reading that quote, to bring it all back to the beginning, like a good improv artist I am, when you said the experiments and rejections and failures, and you being someone from a creative lens that I would look up to, it was comforting to hear you or to read that quote. And it's kind of the exact same thing that you're saying. Like, as an artist, as a creative, we're all insecure. We all doubt ourselves. And I think the hardest thing is pushing through that. And so when we can get to these spurts of inspiration from individuals, I know I get inspired by interviewing on the podcast. And my previous podcast, which was called the Creative Hustler Podcast, I interviewed some awesome people. And it was just, I think back, and it's just, even when I look back, it's so inspiring. And I think sometimes it's hard to see the forest through the trees, and we're often in the trees, right?
Absolutely. Got to learn how to have fun living there.
Exactly. Debbie, I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you, and thank you so much for joining us in the studio. Tell everyone where you live on the internet and how they can get in contact with you.
I live at debbiemillman.com. And I am on Instagram and Threads and Twitter and all of those places as Debbie Millman. So it's pretty easy to find me. And I always love to hear from people. Awesome.
And for more on the Branders Magazine Talking with Branders podcast, go to brandersmagazine.com. And for more on me, well, I'm at stevenbacanza.com. And until next time, we'll see you. Peace out. And that's a wrap for the Branders Magazine Talking with Branders podcast. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and leave us a review and rating. And for more on the Talking with Branders podcast, go to brandersmagazine.com. For more on me, go to stevenbacanza.com, and you can find us on all those fancy social networks. Until next time, peace out.